Take a seat.
The question was, what kind of incentives did we give?
Yeah, I know. Of course, at that point of time, it was relatively easy to get tax incentives based on the rationale that if you don't give some special benefits, they will go somewhere else and Singapore will lose it. And then not only lose it, but they will export the tires to Singapore if they were from somewhere else. And we will end up buying their tires without actually having the plant in Singapore. So we gave some incentives. But it was very difficult for us to get the incentives because, as has been repeated by Mr. Dhanabalan and everything else, at one stage of EDB's life, the authority vested in EDB to recommend and award pioneer status was taken away from Singapore and resided in Kuala Lumpur. And every time we got a project in Singapore that required our support and our award of tax incentives to make things happen, we've got to write to Kuala Lumpur, you see. And there is a lot recorded to say that during the years that when we were in Malaysia, namely 1963 to 1965, we only got KL to approve one pioneer status proposal, only one.
Things were a little bit slower then.
Huh?
Things were a little bit slower then.
No, things were a lot slower because, to give you an idea and some kind of relativity, well, let me just say this. EDB is going to be half a century old in a couple of years' time. So that means, we have been doing this and giving pioneer certificates to desired products for almost 50 years already. And our average is like, so. Except for the years 1963 to 1965 where we avoided one in 2 years, our average has been about 40 a year, roughly. Consistently from the day that EDB was started up until now, we have actually awarded an average of 40 pioneer status certificates a year.
And that's despite losing our common market status.
And in spite of losing our common market case.
Surely it must have been more difficult once you didn't have the market to go out and make the pitch. And, when we were in the field, we would get reinforcements from time to time. You would get ministers coming. You would even get the Prime Minister coming. When he was PM, used to go on the road as well. And he would visit you and you would take him around to see companies. What do you recall of that? I mean, what was it like having him in the room? How did he pitch it?
No, I never took around to see companies because it wouldn't have been right for me to do that because although he had the political will and he was willing to support our effort, but investment promotion is an EDB function. It's not a PMO function. So I should not involve him in actually going around. But what we do is that we decided actually that when he comes around, we would gather a group of about 15 or 20 companies who are dithering about coming to Singapore. People like Suan Hyang and I and David and Jonathan and all our other friends and all have been working on, but who are dithering because, to back up a little bit, there are three dreaded words to any investor, any kind of investor, whether it's a portfolio investor, a private equity investor, or foreign direct investor. There are three dreaded words, and the words are simply surprise, shock, uncertainty. Now, when you apply those words to Singapore, Singapore was no surprise. Singapore had good governance even then. Singapore was quite open. Singapore was not a surprise. And Singapore, they felt, would not be actually a place where they would come and be shocked. And Singapore, of course, had no uncertainty. But the neighborhood around us was full of surprise, shock, and uncertainty. And this was during the time of the U.S. presence in Vietnam, So they were never sure of that. In fact, and they were being bombarded at that time by a lot of media reports almost on a daily basis to say that, what is happening in Southeast Asia is, there will be a domino theory. And if you read Kissinger's memoirs, you will find that actually domino theory is a recurring theme in Kissinger's books. And the theory actually, which goes back quite a few years before, was actually first advanced by Eisenhower. Eisenhower thought that, in communist regions, when one country collapses militarily or economically, that it will trigger a domino effect from one country to another. So they were worried about this. They said, Singapore may be stable, no surprise, no shock, no uncertainty, but the region is so surprising, so shockful, and so uncertain. What will happen to our operation in Singapore? So I'm least equipped, to offer political interpretations of the region in Southeast Asia. So if there was an opportunity for to come and give his perspective and assure my dithering investors about that, then maybe actually I can get some yield. And yield is actually a very, very, what shall I say, very strong word in our minds because, in 1975 when Mr. Ngiam Tong Dao came to be chairman EDB, and I went back into the field, because we were going through the 1975 recession, we had to double and treble efforts. So Mr. Ngiam used to send me a lot of messages and say, how come no projects? How come no projects? In 1975, you see. And then my response to him was actually, here, look at the figures of our contacts. We were seeing hundreds of companies. And then his rejoinder would be, yes, I concede that you are seeing hundreds of companies, but your yield is so poor, he said. But your yield is so poor. So then we started to calculate for our regional meetings and all that, to calculate and see what actually was our yield.
Yes.
And when I was with the ST pre-event interview, I ran through my mind about each officer seeing 150 people, in a working year. So and when these officers come out for a 2-year term, they would actually have accomplished roughly 300 important meetings. And so what is our yield out of the 300 meetings? On average, our yield is 1%. 1%. So a successful EDB officer going out to the field for 2 years, doing 300 contacts, will be lucky if actually he can land 3 projects for Singapore in the 2 years, you see. So it's 1%.
But size mattered as well.
But in 1975,
yes,
because it was a recession year worldwide. Why a recession year worldwide? Because in 1975 was the aftermath of the high oil price increase of 1973. So before the Iranian Revolution of 79, but still after the high price increase of 1973. So because it is in that recessionary scenario, you will find that actually maybe your yield might not be 1%. Your yield might be, 0.5% or 0.3%, you see. So therefore...
Well, I think we've sort of wound that road to the end. And I want to take the yield question maybe into a different context. And that is yield about projects in the future. There were many questions that we received about the future. Two of them, one from Mr. Tan, also from Peter Lim, about Dr. Winsemius. If I read Peter's question to you, he says, do you think Singapore needs a new generation Dr. Winsemius to help us with some radical new thinking? And what would your specifications be for a Winsemius version 2? How would those specs differ from the ones that moved Singapore to appoint Dr. Winsemius and embrace his advice during your watch at EDB? And I'm not going to I'm not going to ask Bock to answer that question right now for two reasons. One, we're going to take a short break so that we can all be comfortable. And two, I'd like to know if there are any other questions from the floor about investment promotion. And if you do have them, come see me during the break, and I'll try to work it into the script.
Take a seat.